You mentioned briefly earlier the term psychic vampires, which is probably shows up more prevalently in literature than on film. Do you think that that's a misappropriation of the term vampire? And if so, what's your take on it, really?
I mean, in case anyone's not familiar with the terminology here, psychic vampire is a term for someone who is otherwise comparatively normal, i.e. alive, and who drains energy from those around them, deliberately or otherwise. And I think, the term psychic vampire, I think to a certain extent probably ennobles these people a little too much. I think a better term might be asshole. Because you give the psychic vampire gives it this kind of, whereas no, because it can also be stretched as far enough as to people who are just needy. Somebody who's always sort of, you find yourself constantly doing favours for them and feeling, enfeebled by it. Somehow they're very good at socially cornering you. That's sort of one definition, and there's the other one where they're sort of quasi-mystical process. But I think it's a misappropriation of the term. Vampirism has been used to cover all sorts of... Marx uses the vampire myth to describe capitalism. So it has all sorts of uses. But yeah, that's not a vampire. I say that's something different. Anyone else? Yeah.
Sunlight was a weakness for me. It's always been a kind of absolute until recently for vampires. Is that based in, from Stoker, or is there any, mythology at all to that?
In Stoker, oddly enough, the Count actually goes out during the day on several occasions. In Stoker, the original Stoker, I think it removes most of his supernatural powers, so he can't turn into a badger or whatever, or, a mist or... So, he's deprived of that in Sunlight, but it doesn't actually harm him. And again, Sunlight isn't mentioned as something within the folkloric vampires of the Renaissance, Middle Ages and 18th century. Sunlight's not mentioned as something which is harmful to them. They do tend to come out at night, but I think that's just part of that, that's the assumption of when, bogeymen come out. And a lot of the early ideas about vampirism, and again, there was some debate here, because these which seem like sort of trivia to us, have got quite a lot of theological significance. For example, with the werewolf myth, which we discussed last time, it was very important for theologians to establish that werewolves didn't actually change shape. They behaved like ravenous animals, but they didn't change shape. One of the reasons this was so important was because if they did change shape, it allows that the devil can create matter. And it was very important for a lot of clergymen to say, no, the devil can pervert things and whatever else, but he can't actually do what God can do, which is to make shit. And... with the early vampire myth, most of the theological idea was that that vampires were actually sort of demonic puppets. They're sort of a post-mortem possession, if you like. The devil or a demon enters them, and that's how they go about. They aren't actually the person themselves come back. It's because of their evil lifestyle. Then that allows the devil to sort of take a hold of them once they've been buried and do all sorts of bad stuff. Anyone else? Yes.
We discussed Elizabeth Bathory earlier on, doing as well about the significance, particularly upon the modern vampire, of Vlad Tepes.
Yeah, it's for benefit of anyone who's not familiar with dear old Vlad Tepes is, I think, the pronunciation in Romanian. Tepes means impaler, so Vlad the Impaler is probably many of you familiar with, or indeed Vlad Dracula. And Dracula was his nickname, which means translates as either son of the devil or son of the dragon. Romanians maintain it's son of the dragon because they're a bit tired of everyone coming over, and he's a local hero. He was a 15th century voivod. A voivod is a term, an Eastern European term, which means a warlord basically, but also a ruler. And he's a reward because he scared the hell out of the Turks. He's a hero because he scared the hell out of the Turks. His old man was a member of a chivalric order called the crusading order called the Order of the Dragon, and so his dad was called Vlad Dracul, and he became Vlad Dracula, as in the son of his famous father. There's been a lot of speculation. A lot of one of my recent books is a book about Vlad as Vlad the Impaler, son of the devil, hero of the people, which is a reference to the fact that the communists actually adopted him as being a sort of an iconic national hero. And there's been a hell of a lot of debate, including in my book, about whether there is much connection between the historical Dracula and the fictional character from Stoker. And in one corner you have a couple of American academics, one of them Romanian-American, Florescu and McNally, who wrote a very significant book in the 70s called In Search of Dracula, where they first really popularised the fact that the name Dracula isn't just a random collection of syllables. Stoker had found it in a book about Transylvania when he was looking for a name. And I think, what did he originally call his count? It was something very silly. I think it was Count Vampire, or Count Wampir, or something like that. And he happily moved on to Dracula. So McNally and Florescu sort of saying, here's the clear inspiration. And on the other side, you've got a Canadian academic called Elizabeth Miller, who's saying it's almost completely coincidental. He took the name from that, but nothing else. To get to nitty-gritty, and there's a huge amount of sort of material and debate about how significant the connection is. But to get to nitty-gritty, there are only really two things which might suggest that Vlad the Impaler might have been a vampire, and he's certainly not seen in those lights amongst Romanians. One of them is that amongst his many notorious atrocities, which were all recorded by German monks in pamphlets, which they sent westward, was that while his victims were impaled above him, he had a piece of bread and he dipped it in the blood and ate that. So obviously that fulfills the idea of him blood drinking. Unfortunately, as with almost everything in this particular debate, people have challenged that and said, actually, that's not in the original document, and somebody's copied it out, and and then it's entered erroneously. And the only other one is that towards the end of his days, Vlad married and Vlad, of course, was an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and he married, and it was either, no one's sure whether it's the sister or the cousin of the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus. And Matthias was Catholic as the ruler of Hungary. And there's some suggest that Matthias would never have allowed his relative to marry Vlad unless Vlad converted to Catholicism. If Vlad converted to Catholicism, then he would have, in the eyes of his compatriots, have been an apostate. And of course, apostates are one of the categories of people who are inclined to come back from the grave and bother people. I think we're probably running a bit low on time if you want to have time for it. So if there are any more questions, or shall we all go and have cigarettes and coffee and stuff? Thank you very much.